folks who are out in the community on a regular basis, making sure that the community understands the importance of their research. They are Sharon Mankey and Marisa Rang from Communication Sciences and Disorders, and they are here to give a talk on training first responders to use alternative augmentative communication systems. Thank you very much.
First of all, we want to thank Dr. Link in Arts and Sciences for a grant called the START grant. That helped us to go outside of Allen County this summer, and then also we received the Community Engagement Grant from the Office of Academic Affairs and the Institute of Research, Scholarship, and Creative Endeavors, which gave us money to travel throughout the state of Indiana this summer and talk to first responders about how important it is to understand how to communicate with people who are nonverbal. I want you to imagine, think about the last year, our weather patterns that the seriousness that we've gone through. We've gone through 3 hurricanes and wildfires in California. And if that's not devastating enough to the country, I want you to think about being an individual with a disability and you're not able to talk and make your needs and wants known. What happened many times during these emergencies were that people who used augmentative alternative communication were maybe rescued by well-meaning first responders, but their communication devices were left in their homes. And so they had no way to tell people where they did want to go, where they didn't want to go, and there were prolonged periods of them being reunited with their families because they couldn't get a hold of their families because they had no way of communicating who their families were and where they could be found. Not many of us are going to go through anything like that, but not one of us should have to go through that.
So before we get into our research project, we want to give a little bit of a backstory, how this all got started. Sharon and I attended an international AAC conference in 2012 at which we heard a presentation about something called AAC World. From the Holland Bloorview Kids Rehabilitation Hospital in Toronto, Canada, they created a simulation event in which participants could come in and be immersed into the world of AAC to know how it might be to communicate using augmentative means. So we wanted to bring that here to the university, and we did so for the first time in 2013. We specifically sent out invitations to first responders. Unfortunately, that first year, we didn't have any first responders, but in 2014, we had someone from the Indiana State Police attend, and we were hoping that that would kickstart our training program. Unfortunately, there was no forward movement from that, but in 2016, we had a firefighter from the Southwest Fire District here in Fort Wayne who attended and had some conversations with people using AAC at the event. And from there, he realized the importance of being trained on how to communicate with people using AAC. He invited us to come to his firehouse and train the men and women who were under him. And so that was our initial training in August of 2016.
And from there it just kind of it got really interesting because all the phone calls that we had made over the previous 2 years of trying to get fire departments and police departments and ambulance people, EMS, interested in us coming and talking to them, we got nowhere. And all of a sudden now, with that one training under our belt, all of a sudden there were places that were contacting us saying, we need that training for our first responders. And so that's when this whole thing took off. So we developed the program from that initial time that we went. It's kind of changed a little bit over time. But we do a 60-minute, basically 60-minute lecture on what augmentative alternative communication is and why it's important to understand how to use it and how to respond to it, with 5 to 15 minutes of hands-on experience with some scenarios that we've cooked up for the first responders that are actually true to life scenarios. They're not something that we don't know anything about. Then we wrap up for about 5 minutes, and then we have question and answers. So during that whole time, we're going to tell them what AAC is, the basic knowledge of it, and then the benefits of using it with people. So AAC, we keep saying AAC. What is that? Well, the first A stands for augmentative, and that means that if you can communicate, but maybe your speech isn't really clear, maybe you're very, very difficult to understand at times, or maybe in the morning you can communicate well, but as the day goes on and your muscles get tired, your communication gets less clear and people can't understand you. You would use it to help your speech. That's what augmentative means. Alternative is the second A in AAC, and that means that I may be able to make some sounds, but I'm not able to produce speech that can be understood at all. And so this person uses it, instead of communicating verbally, they use the communication device all of the time. You will also hear these things called a talker, or a speech generating device, or an SGD, an iPad communication board. There are a lot of different names for them, but they're all the same thing. It's to help somebody be able to communicate better. Now, we know that communication needs to be two things. It needs to be effective, which means I speak, you listen, you understand, you speak, I listen, I understand, and this goes back and forth, and we make our conversation understood, and we communicate well. But it also needs to be efficient. And this is one area that AAC, while it may be more efficient than listening to them when they're trying to talk verbally, it still is not very efficient. We speak at about 150 to 220 words per minute. That seems to be the sweet spot. Any slower than that, we kind of tend to lose interest and our mind wanders. Any faster than that, we feel like we're on the airplane getting the pre-flight check as far as, you know, the seat belt and the air mask dropping out of the ceiling, that kind of thing. And we can't even figure out what they're talking about. AAC is not going to be that fast as typical speech. And so we have to prepare the first responders for that.
We also like to give them an idea of who they might see using an AAC system. That it could be someone with a developmental disability, such as cerebral palsy, Down syndrome, autism, or it could be someone with an acquired disability, someone who's had typical speech and language and then had some kind of accident or developed an illness, such as someone who's had a traumatic brain injury, a stroke, or developed ALS or Lou Gehrig's disease. We also talk about how the skill level or ability level may vary as well, given how long they've had the device, maybe what their condition is, how they access the device. All of these factors can influence how quickly and how easily they can communicate. The bottom line, though, that we try to drive home is to not judge the person by their outward packaging, that they can communicate in some way. We also wanted to look into the research to know that what we were telling people was on a firm, solid foundation. And we found two studies, the first one by Joan Petersilia out of the University of California, Irvine, and her study said that people with disabilities are at a 4 to 10 times greater risk of being victims of crime, and that children with disabilities are more than twice as likely to be physically abused and almost twice as likely to be sexually abused. And we highlight these statistics so that if the first responders go out on a call that is an abuse situation or domestic dispute, that they know to talk to everyone involved at that location. That they may not get the full story if they're only talking to the verbal individual. because we know that in abuse situations, 93% of the perpetrators are people known to the victim. So it's family members, it's neighbors, teachers, bus drivers. And so just talking to the verbal individual, first responders may not get the full and complete story.
Another research project that we looked at was one by Diane Bryen from Temple University. She surveyed a large number of individuals who use augmentative communication and asked about problems with abuse and sexual abuse. And these are her statistics from that study. I'm not going to go over, you can read those. But what was really interesting was she sent out a second survey, and the survey asked 2 questions. Number 1, did you return the original survey? And number 2, if you did not return the original survey, why did you not return the survey? And of the responses that she got back, the majority were that, no, I did not return the survey, and the reason why was I was afraid that the person who does the abuse would retaliate against me. So these are not, the statistics are higher. I can't tell you how much higher they are than that, but I find this absolutely appalling.
So we put these links up here so that you can see it's not just what shows up in the research. These abuse situations are happening in our neighborhoods, in our faith-based communities, on the school buses. We see reports of these quite frequently. And so when first responders say, well, why should I care? Or why should this matter to me? We tell them that this very well could happen in your community. You could get a call to a school, to a home, and have to figure out the story and be able to help the individual with whatever that situation may be.
So we're going to give you a little bit of basic AAC 101 so you understand what we're talking about. And there are 4 levels of AAC. The first one is no-tech, and this is just whatever you have as part of your body. So I can sign, I can point, I can gesture, I can do a lot of things, but there's no extra equipment. There might be some vocalization, but there's no verbalization if I can't talk. The next tech is low tech, and these would be similar to some kind of paper communication board. So it may be a board that has pictures on it. It may be a board that has words on it. It may be a board that has ABCs on it so they can spell things out. Whatever it is that this person can use to communicate. This one, one of the companies gave us these boards to distribute to the places where we've done our in-services. There's a body part here, and I can point to what part is injured. I can point to the pain scale that's across the top here. So a lot of different ways to use this one. And then there's a spelling board on this side so the person can spell. Of course, this isn't going to work with a 3-year-old child, and therefore we need to use the picture-based. This one is rather interesting because I had a student who was Burmese, and I had her write the Burmese in over above the English so that in the Burmese population, the police could use this kind of a communication board with them. If they can read the Burmese, they can point to the symbol that it means, and yet it's translated there for the American-speaking first responder. Then we go to medium tech, and medium tech has now a voice output. Low tech does not. Medium tech has a voice output. We set this communication system up for emergency situations. So, I need help. All right. This is dependent on recorded speech. It has 32 cells. It has 4 levels, which means that I can say a whole whopping 168 things. Now, the problem with this is, you can imagine, I don't say the same 168 things every day. And so it limits the person on what they can say. And yet, it's better than not having anything at all. High-tech devices, we can't even own a high-tech device here. We've got some iPads with some programs that have the high-tech programs on them. But high-tech devices run up to $20,000. And this type of device is so sophisticated that there can be environmental controls on it that can turn on change the temperature on the furnace, or turn on the television set, or open the garage door. It can even act as a cell phone of sorts. But that $20,000 price tag is quite pricey, and when you leave it in a hurricane situation and you go back a month later to go get it, chances are it's going to be pretty well damaged and not usable.
We also want to give you an idea of how people might access their device. There are two main categories of accessing. There's direct selection, which is usually the fastest method of someone being able to access their device. This could be using a finger point, this could be using a switch or a joystick to move the cursor around on the device. Or if the individual is motorically impaired significantly, then we could go to scanning. And Shannon's going to show us what that looks like.
This is a pincer switch. There are tons of switches. I don't even know all the kinds of switches there are. But say, for instance, that I want to say something about my heart, which is this symbol right here. I press the switch, and it starts to cycle through the vocabulary. It goes row by row. I let it know that that's the row that I want to talk about. And I have to wait until it gets to the one I want.
Heart pain.
Okay, and then I'm able to activate the switch again and get the machine to speak for me. All right? All of that is dependent on the person's reflexes, how fast they can move and hit the switch.
As you can see, scanning is much slower than direct selection. So if we can have someone direct select, that's going to be the thing we want to do.
Okay, this is where our video should be. So we're going to go ahead and press it, but we're not going to have any sound. So I'm going to kind of walk you through this. What happened was that Mike is a fellow that we met from, he's a good friend of ours, from Wisconsin. He's actually on the Governor's Council for Individuals with Disabilities. And thought I heard it. Okay, so Mike did a public service announcement for us a number of years ago, and that was wonderful. It was like a Steve Hawking moment on Big Bang. And you've seen Dr. Hawking on Big Bang, where he just looks at his machine and it says all this wonderful stuff. Something like this.
I know I want to go for a ride. I know I want to go for a ride.
Okay, that's one of the problems too, is that that's the loudest my iPad can go. All right, so I said it magically, but that's not the way real life is. Real life is I have to program this in. And so Dr. Hawking would get his information that he needed to say in the program. He would sit, he would input his device, and then when they would cue him during the taping, he would look at his device because he had an eye gaze system, and it would activate the device and it would say what he wanted to say. You're all thinking it's magic. You're all thinking that, wow, that went really fast. No, it's very, very time consuming. So what Mike is doing here for us, we said, Mike, we loved your public service announcement, but what we need to do is we need to show people how long it takes to access the device and do whatever it is that you need to do. So Mike and his dad got together, bless their hearts, and Mike's dad is acting as a first responder, and he's gone in, he says, oh, are you Mike? Okay, tell me what's going on. And Mike is typing into his machine using the head array in his headrest. He's typing in, I think I'm having a heart attack. Okay? So now he's just said, I think I'm having a heart attack. It took him the whole time to be able to say, to get that ready to be able to say while I was up here talking. His dad, of course, did the right thing. He stood in front of him, had eye contact with him to communicate, which is what we do with everybody else. Why wouldn't we do that with somebody who uses a machine? But now he's gone around the back because he wants the first responders to see how Mike is moving that cursor and making up what it is that he wants to say. So Mike uses the buttons in his headrest to be able to activate the switch to go up and down and left and right. And then he hits the switch again to select that word. So he says, I can't see anything, and I am having trouble with now he goes to my, but for whatever reason it doesn't activate. And remember, he's doing this all with his head because his body does not work. Mike has cerebral palsy. Heart. Okay, so Mike didn't know what the symptoms of a heart attack were. They didn't plan this out as well as maybe they could have, but anyway, at least he's got it across to the first responder that he's having trouble with his heart. And so the first responder can go from that point on and help him with that. He asks him some yes and no questions. Yes and no is good as long as you know what yes and no, how they use their yes and no. Some of them it's yeah or no. But I had a friend whose yes was and whose no was. And if you don't know that, you're not going to know that they're actually communicating with you. So sometimes you need to check in. How do you say yes? Tell me yes. How do you say no? Tell me no. So then you can ask yes and no questions and get a good idea of what's going on. It took Mike 4 minutes and 43 seconds to type in what he wanted to tell the first responder until the first responder knew what to do. Now, we don't expect first responders in the case of a heart attack or a terrible accident or whatever to take the time to sit there and wait on all of this stuff, but they wouldn't do that either if the person was verbal. They would assess the situation and they're going to package and go. And I tell the first responders, you do what you can do, but when you have time, take the time to communicate well with these people because they know more about themselves or the situation than you know.
The last little bit of the lecture that we give is leaving them with 7 tips on how to improve their interactions with individuals who are nonverbal. And these are relatively common sense things of treating the individual with the same respect that they treat anyone else. That if they have a device, assume that they know how to use it. Making eye contact. Asking simply one question at a time to give them the time that they need to understand the question, but then also time to formulate their response. And then after they do give a response, checking in with them to make sure that the first responder understands what the individual told them. And then making sure that they have their device for that conversation, that if it's on like the kitchen table, that you go over, pick it up, give it to them. And again, it all boils down to respect.
Diane Bryen has, I have a video of Diane Bryen talking about people who use augmentative alternative communication. And she says that they often feel like they're treated as pieces of furniture, as dogs, as something less than human. So, okay. Now we're into the research. We'll go pretty quickly through this. Oh, this is me. Okay. Demographics. This is the number of people that we have in our study so far. We can have up to 1,000 subjects. We have trained probably about 1,200 people, maybe a little over that right now, throughout the state of Indiana. About 1,800 to 1,000 here in Allen County alone, and we still aren't done. We haven't gotten to the Fort Wayne Fire Department yet, which we need to do. But we have more males are in these kind of jobs than females, and there's a kind of a bubble with more people being 40 to 49-year-old. But look, we have some 70 to 79-year-old people who are still volunteering their time or working as first responders. We also, this looks kind of skewed one way, but what happened was Allen County Sheriff's Department called us and said, we want to do this. And that summer, then Fort Wayne Police Department called and said, we want you over 10 days to come in and in-service our people. And so that's why we have a lot of police officers. What's really interesting is when we get outside of Allen County, what we are encountering is more the EMS and the firefighters. We don't seem to be able to get in with the county sheriff's departments or the police departments in the smaller towns.
One of the first questions that we asked them was simply to name 5 ways to communicate. And we used a pre-training survey and a post-training survey. And we looked at what kind of responses they gave us. We divided their answers into either aided or unaided. So unaided would be the no tech, aided would be everything else. And in the pre-event surveys, they were about 50-50 in the responses between aided and unaided. But in the post-event, we found that perhaps because we talked a lot about aided methods, they gave us quite a few more aided options. We also noted that they gave us more answers in the post-survey. There were fewer spaces left blank in the post-survey.
We looked at those 5 ways to communicate, and pre-survey there were 2,705 answers for ways to communicate, or 3.25 per participant. And in the post-survey there were 3,230 answers, which made it about 3.88 per participant. But we also looked at the different categories and things like that, and Marisa can speak better to that than I can.
So up here we have the unaided methods. So the first slide we showed all of their answers combined, and now we've separated out only looking at unaided, and then the next slide will be only looking at aided. When we look at unaided, the breakdown between the different unaided methods, meaning sign language, pointing, gesturing, body language, all of those things, the distribution between pre and post surveys was approximately the same. If they gave an unaided response, it was pretty much the same unaided response pre and post. Now when we get into the aided category, this changed. In the pre-survey, the brown color is non-electronic word-based, so writing. So as you can see, pre-training, they gave a lot of responses about writing. But then if you look to the right and you look at post, very few people talk about writing, and instead that yellow color is dedicated devices. So as we talk more and more about the high-tech and medium-tech devices, they became more aware of that. And so that's what we saw on the post-event survey. The next 4 questions that were on the survey, we used a Likert scale for them to tell us how much they agreed with the statement, or this first question about comfort level. How comfortable are they with interacting with people who use AAC? And you'll see that the orange is the pre-event and the white gray color is the post-event. So there was a shift from being less comfortable to at least being somewhat comfortable using or interacting with people who use AAC. And this is one of our primary targets for this training.
For the effectiveness, how effective do you think augmentative alternative communication is? We didn't see much of a shift there, a little bit more positive, but it really wasn't too significant for that one. Efficiency-wise, they had thought that it would be more efficient than what it actually is, and I think that through going through the in-service, they realized that it's not quite as fast as what they thought it was. Many of them thought that Dr. Hawking was an example of being able to communicate well with AAC, and he is, but they just didn't see how he inputted his device.
And then the final question using the Likert scale was, how difficult do you think it is to use AAC? And here we saw a change, as they realized in the post-survey, after having a hands-on experience in the scenarios, they realized that it was much more difficult than they thought it was before we did the training.
Open-ended.
Oh, it is open-ended. Okay, sorry. So then we get into the open-ended questions. And these were much more difficult for us to analyze than what we anticipated, as it was difficult to be able to categorize their answers. So the first open-ended question we asked was, how is using an AAC system beneficial for the individual using it, for the AAC user? And we found that between pre and post, the greatest change came from communication success. That they felt it was most important for the individual to be able to express their thoughts, express their needs, or share the information that they had.
The second question was, how does it help the first responder? And again, if you look, it was the successfulness of, is that a word? The success of the communication. Being able to understand what it was that someone wanted to say or needed to say so that they could get the help that they wanted. On both of these, the number of people who didn't answer the question went down. So we take that too as they had increased their knowledge.
And then the final open-ended question was, what is the most important thing to do when communicating with someone who uses AAC? And we found that they took away the need for time, and their attitudes changed as well. That they noted being patient, having respect, and again, giving them the time that they need to formulate their comments, their answers. And these were two of the targets that we set out with at the very beginning.
So we've had a lot of people give us some feedback after the training is over, and you can read those comments up there. But one that we just received this last week was from the Chief of Training from the Penn Township Fire Department in Mishawaka. He wrote a letter thanking us for coming and doing the training, and he noted in the letter that a mother brought her daughter to the fire station. The daughter and the family had just moved into the area. The daughter was going to start school. She had a communication device. Mom was afraid that the fire department would get called for, a situation at the school, and they wanted the fire department to be aware that their child used this communication device. And he stated that the mother was super impressed, and he put that in bold type. The mother was super impressed that we had already had previous training in communicating with children like her daughter. And Maurice and I have been talking about this off and on, and we know we're saying the same thing, but sometimes you just need to do something because it's the right thing to do. You know, you may not get paid for it. We didn't for the first couple of years that we've been working with first responders to try to get this message out there. And then we received the grant money, which allowed us to be able to travel. We didn't take money for pay, but allowed us to be able to travel to tell other cities about this. We are the only people who are known to be doing this type of training in the United States. We've been told that by 2 members of the disaster preparedness team of Homeland Security. And so this is something that we really need to do.
As we continue to look at our data and continue to analyze it, we want to break it down even further into looking at whether the first responders' occupation played a role in their answers, whether their age played a role, or whether their gender played a role in the answers that they gave us.
Some of the changes that we would make if we do this study again is that we might change the way that we worded some of our questions. Some of our data we've not really been able to use because we ask expecting to get a number, how many people have you interacted with who have been nonverbal? And instead of getting a number of people, we got lots or many or hundreds or, you know, a few. And that didn't help us with the data collection. So we would change some of the questions that we ask. We also would like to develop more scenarios. We have scenarios for the fire department, a couple of those. We have scenarios for the police department and for the EMS, but we'd like to have maybe 7 or 8 scenarios that pertain just to EMS, just to firefighters, just to police officers, so they can be trying to solve these problems with the skills that they have for their jobs in something that would be meaningful just for them.
Throughout this project, we have realized that this is a much bigger project than either Sharon or I anticipated. What, you knew?
I knew.
Oh, oh. Okay, I didn't know. And so we realized that we do need help, and so we're reaching out to area SLPs. As we traveled this summer, we tried to make contact with SLPs in those towns so that we could give them our materials and they could continue the training. Because we were only there 2 or 3 days, and so we only trained a small handful of first responders in those communities. So we're trying to reach out and we're looking for a way to share our training materials online so that they can go onto a site, download it, and then run with it in their own areas.
If you would please give them a round of applause. Thank you both.